So my name is Derek McNeil, and I'm the academic dean at the Seattle School. And this is our new podcast, Text, Soul, and Culture. And I'll say it again, Text, Soul, and Culture. Sometimes people hear different things in that. But it's our opportunity to really explore with you, the audience, a different way of seeing, a different way of making sense in the world, and of translating what we do at the school. And so I look forward to the coming months where we interview faculty and guest speakers. We'll also introduce to you the idea of how we think about learning and the experience for students in the learning process, and also our commitment to formative learning as opposed to simply information download. So I'm excited about this podcast. I want to introduce to you Nicole Greenwald, who is the Director of Enrollment and Management and Marketing. Nicole was the person who brought this idea to my desk. And she had to do a little bit of twisting. I said, maybe I'll think about it. But Nicole, I'm going to call the creator of this idea. And so I want to introduce Nicole and maybe talk a little bit about why we're launching this podcast now. And what do we think it's going to be?
Yes. Yeah, I'm so excited that we're doing this. And it has been an idea that has been in formation for a while because, and I think you were one of the people that sparked the idea for me. It was a couple years ago when there was a tragedy that happened in the world, and we were standing in the hallway with others thinking through how do we as an organization respond to this. Mm-hmm. And I remember you saying it's difficult for us to think about responding in sound bites because as a community we seek to be engaged, but we hope to do so in a way that's reflective. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's difficult to do at the pace of social media. Yeah. And that really was something that I began to wrestle with. What does it look like for us to be engaged in the world as an academic institution, as a theological community, beyond the classroom? Mm-hmm. I think that that's something that is happening every day here with our faculty and students. And what does it look like for us to invite our alumni, people beyond the walls of this community, into discourse with us? I think some of why now, when I think about podcasting as a tool, is I don't know that we can read the news or walk around in our cities and not feel called to respond. And so I'm curious about this more as a tool. Like, how do we use this as a tool to respond to the world in need? And how do we engage in relationship with people in our community and outside our community through the lens of text, soul, culture?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned about being reflective versus just simply reactive has become very loud. And it feels like we're in a very political environment that invites reactivity. And I think for all of us, not just simply right or left, but even the categories of right or left feel reactive categories at time. And how do we think beyond or feel, and then talk and make meaning of the sort of things that are happening with us feels important to do. And so I'm appreciative of your notion of let's do a podcast. Because I think I would rather talk in class or talk in some other venue, but this feels like a really valuable tool for us to think about sharing kind of what, as a community, we're thinking about and talking about together. So thank you. Thank you for thinking and even pulling on me to consider doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think as I was thinking about sitting down with you today, I was looking back at some of our notes and documents that we've kind of been creating as this has come to be. And what this has evolved since it was first brought up. And what it will become is going to evolve. And I think that's why we're doing a podcast as well. I was thinking through of the ways that we can respond, and one way that this community does that is through writing. I think that's been a big part of the story of the Seattle School, is this commitment to narrative, that it informs us about who we are, it informs us about who God is, and it informs the way we can live into the world. But there's also something that can feel a bit two-dimensional about writing too, and something that changes when there's voices and when there's another person responding with even sounds of yes, I resonate, or let me press into this a little bit more with you, like something changes in dialogue, and that's why that's a big piece of the way we do education here too. But I think that that's also something that the world is needing. And so what does it look like for us to also offer that to the world and in a new way?
So you're sharing a little bit of what you hope long term, and I'm going to maybe nudge you a little bit that way. And what would you hope the long term outcome? And you've shared a bit about that in terms of both introducing new ways of thinking, also how in some ways this community is more reflective than reactive, how we think about narrative. But as you can cast a kind of a vision forward, what would you hope this continues to develop? Its development. What does it look like in its long-term development?
I think the first thing that pops into mind is genuine encounter. Like I'm excited that you'll be hosting this, and that the listeners will begin to develop a relationship with you and your voice and your way of relating to others. But I also feel even more excited that each time you'll be sitting with someone new, or maybe you'll be sitting with someone now and then revisiting conversation with them again in 3 months or 6 months, but that each time that there will be something spontaneous that occurs between you and the other. And I think that is something divine, and it's something transformative. I think about our mission of training people to be competent in the study of text soul culture in order to serve God and neighbor through transforming relationships.
By getting that in there.
But it's like, it's our mission statement, but it's also something that I think is really a daily commitment, and why we believe in training people to become counselors and pastors and leaders. But there's also a surrender to the organic nature of being human and being impacted by another person's story or opinion. And so I hope for that you'll be changed, that the listeners will be changed, that the people who are interviewed will be changed, and that will create movement within us, but also movement within our culture. So that's one. And then the other that popped to mind was modeling. I think you brought up a few times today the reactivity of our culture. And I was also thinking of the way we separate as people. We separate into the subsets of people who have kids, people who are married, people who are professionals.
Categories. Really, they've become, they're almost marketing or political categories, and they tend to create boundaries that are artificial, or at least restrict us as opposed to allow us to engage. So if dialogue is a way of kind of leaning in to relationship that pushes beyond the categories or beyond the kind of reactive splitting type of conversations that happen, there is something kind of countercultural about that. So I hope that this can also be a way of modeling and co-learning. How do we do this well? It's interesting. I think I wanted to ask you that for maybe slightly technical reasons, kind of like, why this, why now? But as you're talking, I really hear a sort of romantic quality about how we influence and engage and love the world that we live in. And text, soul, and culture, I think when I first heard that phrase, it really captured my imagination, but it's moved to become something I think about a way of being, not just a way of seeing.
Right.
And so as you're talking, you're really talking about a way to be in the world, not just a tool to help us see more clearly or see differently. Which is pretty potent. That comes through as you're talking about what you hope will happen as we just develops and grows. And it's been for me an opportunity. The selfish part of me is like, I love sitting down and chatting with people. So it gives me a chance to chat with people. But you're right. There is a sense of growing, a sense of even in each conversation, listening for both how history and how present and how future mingle to produce a certain type of hope. And that's, even in this few that we've done so far, it's been exciting to kind of sit with people and talk.
Yeah, and I think that, again, that there is something romantic about the spontaneity of what can happen in dialogue. And as I was kind of coming into work today, something that felt connected to the podcast was actually our group interview process for applicants to the school. And in my role, that's something that I get to steward. And it's often something that people who are exploring who we are have a lot of anxiety around. It's like, a group interview, oh no, it's going to be me competing against these other applicants. Will I get enough time to say the right thing? And then when they arrive and go through it, the feedback we often get is, wow, I was not expecting that. I wasn't expecting to say that. I wasn't expecting her to ask that. I wasn't expecting to connect with him. And there's something spontaneous that occurs that's very powerful and bonding in a way. And it's also, in the more technical quality of, as overseeing enrollment management, deciding who's the right fit for the school and who are we the right fit for. There's a practical component of doing the interview, but I noticed that it's so much more informative than an essay or an application with the kind of standard questions. And so I think that also connects to my hope for this, is that we will learn about ourselves as a community. We'll learn about the world, and that more will emerge.
And the piece that you mentioned in different ways, a sense of awe, of surprise, is really a sense of God in the midst. There's a factor that can't be numerically equated for. It doesn't add up, but there's something more there. And so even hoping that these interviews or these opportunities to share with people and people to share with us is a chance to see God. And I'll just say it that way, to be surprised, to have awe, to have wonder. Wow, I really hadn't, some of those things I hadn't thought about. And
it's kind of the Buber idea of the I thou. When there can be an I thou conversation, a genuine encounter, there isn't the eternal thou shows up. God shows up, and there's a sense of knowing, and at the same time an unknown too. But yet, like, this kind of surrender into that mystery too.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, it has been I know we've been talking a bit about, and I don't have a better word, romantic, and I don't mean romantic in the sense of superficial. I mean it in a deep sense of love and care. And I'm wondering, in terms of the types of guests that you'd like to see on this podcast, if you had a chance to think. We talked a bit about faculty and but what were you hoping in terms of guests? And as because we've been talking about this together. But I'd love to hear how you think and talk about that.
Well, I think two things. I genuinely feel excited about you having our faculty on the podcast with you, and I get to know them as people, and get to interact with them every day, and I get to welcome students in to come and learn from them, but the larger world may not know who they are. And so to get to have an experience of what it's like to be in conversation with them feels exciting. I think our faculty are scholars and practitioners, and so they bring this complexity to the classroom, but they also are so engaged in the world. And I personally feel excited to listen and to hear more of what their story is and how they're engaged right now. And then also we have a privilege here of welcoming all kinds of guests. Cornell West is going to be here next week. We've had Jimmy McGee here a few months ago, and other leaders who come in all the time. And also you're on the road and we're on the road, and to get to sit down with people who have been transformative to your way of thinking, to our own lives, and to get to sit down with them and share that with others feels exciting. And so those are, and also too, I think another kind of dream and hope for guests is thinking about ways to invite our alumni back and to hear about the work that they're doing in the world, the ways that they're leading, and the ways that they're continuing to grow.
It's one of the sort of rich resources I think we have undersold is our alumni. And I think the way we think about alumni as partners through, I mean, it's probably partners through life and lifelong learning, as opposed to you get your degree and you graduate and you're gone, but you really are a member of a community, and a community of discourse, and a community that's still learning, and that's in a learning mode. And so it's exciting to think about having guests of all different, I think, perspectives that touch the school in different sorts of ways, and the chance to share. Well, I mean, this is great. I mean, I appreciate your idea.
Do you mind if I ask you a question?
Yes, I love it.
I think, as you said that, like this idea that has been kind of evolving over time, why are you excited about it? And why are you stepping in as our host? And how are you kind of imagining this being for you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned story and narrative, and I probably think first of story and narrative as writing. And I have felt more comfortable writing and trying to reflect in kind of a writing mode. The interviews that we've had, or at least a couple interviews that I've done, have given me an opportunity to see the value of actually talking into a person's history and seeing the ways they've been shaped, and having conversation, not just simply in the moment of the event, or which is what when I write, I tend to write about the now. I want to write about how I make sense of the now based on, but the historical piece is harder to kind of get to. You have to do a bit more research. Well, this is an opportunity to sit down with people and hear the narrative, to hear what are the things that have shaped them, shaped their viewpoint, shaped their worldview. What are the things that have drawn them to be motivated to work in a certain area, to see themselves as called to something? Those just don't come through in terms of the writing exercise for me. And so that was the first surprise that I think beforehand, truthfully, when it's because you asked me. I mean, that was the first impetus, is because Nicole asked, I was willing to say yes. But I think as I've done it, listening to people's stories or asking them questions and being curious about, how did you get here? Or how did you get to this level of thinking? Or how did this form of action take shape in you before you were thinking about what this form of action is, has been more exciting than I thought. And I think the other thing you mentioned about the surprise, I think people surprise you. I was with a student a little while ago, and she was telling me, sharing a bit about her story. And there are parts of her story that I didn't know, but then made other parts of her enlightened. I was like, oh, that's why. This makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people need to hear a bit of the backstory. And so we're committed to asking not just simply what you're doing currently, and even what you hope to do, but what shaped you. Yeah. And I hope to keep those pieces. Lastly, this notion of wisdom that we've talked about before. The complexity of the world, it feels like it requires wisdom, not just bright, thoughtful people, which I think we have lots of. But the chance to be reflective is a chance to push into that brightness and to hear a bit more of some of the sorrows, some of the shadow, if you will. And I think both hold for us, in the complexity and the paradox, a deeper wisdom. So those are my hopes, that our guests, we tap into some of their wisdom, some of how they've grown, learned, been challenged, struggled, been resilient, find their grit, find a way to love the world in unlovable places. find a way to care about people in deep sorts of ways, and to challenge and protest, and to resist, and take courage, and speak to power. How to get people get formed. And so a big chunk of, I think, the school's sense of learning and teaching is about formation. And I look forward to hearing those stories, the backstory, if you will, the back plot. And I think it's just easier, I'm finding it easier to do that in a conversation than a writing exercise, which is actually a little more comfortable for me.
Yeah. Thank you. I think something that I feel grateful for is your willingness to open space for these conversations and to invite but also to listen. And I'm struck by the impact that has. I think another thing that inspired this was you sharing a story of when you first began in your role here as dean, and how you invited different people in the building to just respond to a short question, and how I think you shared that you had several people who ended up sharing for 45 minutes, an hour, and how much is in us. You've spoken a lot about the backstory and what's shaped us, and that is in the past often, but it's also in the now.
Yes.
And again, that's that kind of divine reality that can occur where past, present, and future can kind of be one.
Yes.
And I hope that
Yes.
that is so with this.
Yes. I hope so too. I look forward to that. Well, it has been a pleasure chatting with you, and I'm still going to keep calling you the creator of this. It has been fun just to talk and have conversations and plan and do some scheming as well as some creative thought. And I've deeply appreciated your insight and your thoughtfulness, your desire to share with an audience about this school. And that has come through, your investment in that. And so I deeply appreciate that. So it's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And maybe I'll talk you into doing this again sometime.
Okay.
That would be fun.
Thanks. I'm excited for what's to come.
Yeah, me too. Take care. Peace. We'll talk to you next time.